The manor stood before me, massive and ominous against the dimming evening sky. As I struggled with the keys, a shiver ran through me, and it wasn't just from the chilly autumn breeze. I convinced myself it was only nerves. After all, it's not every day you're asked to watch over a grand estate, straight from a Victorian ghost story. I pushed open the hefty wooden door, wincing at the loud groan that echoed through the vast entrance hall. "Hello?" I called out, my voice tiny against the silence. Only the steady ticking of an old grandfather clock replied. "Calm down, Emily," I whispered to myself. "Mrs. Harrington said you'd be alone. No need to panic." I dragged my suitcase upstairs, footsteps muffled by thick carpet. The guest room Mrs. Harrington indicated was bigger than my entire flat, complete with a grand bed large enough for a small family. I unpacked swiftly, excited to explore before it got too dark. Each room I entered seemed more luxurious than the last. A library packed from floor to ceiling with books, a music room housing a dusty grand piano, a conservatory filled with lush plants whose names eluded me. It felt like I'd entered a forgotten era of wealth and faded elegance. As night fell, I retreated to the kitchen to prepare dinner, the modern appliances oddly out of place amidst vintage surroundings. Eating pasta alone, the scrape of my fork seemed unsettlingly loud. Sleep didn't come easy that night. The house whispered and creaked around me, unfamiliar sounds causing my heart to race until I reminded myself of my surroundings. By dawn, I was more drained than rested. The next day was uneventful. I worked remotely from the library, pleasantly surprised by the strong Wi-Fi signal. As evening approached, I filled the clawfoot bathtub, hoping a hot bath would ease my nerves. I'd barely sunk into the steaming water when I heard it, a dull thump followed by careful footsteps. Fear gripped me. "It's just the house settling," I thought desperately, though my gut disagreed. Hands trembling, I quickly dressed and pressed my ear to the bathroom door. The footsteps had ceased, replaced by the unmistakable sounds of drawers opening and closing. Someone was inside, searching for something. Panic rose in my chest. My phone was in the bedroom, the landline downstairs. I was trapped. Think, Emily, think. Spotting a heavy glass soap dish, I grasped it tightly. Better than nothing. Slowly, I cracked open the bathroom door. The hallway was empty, but movement echoed from a guest bedroom. Carefully, I moved toward the stairs, my heart hammering. As my foot hit a creaky floorboard, the noise abruptly stopped. Terrified, I bolted downstairs, footsteps thundering behind me. The front door was locked, and panic erased any memory of the correct key. A strong hand spun me around, and instinctively I swung the soap dish, connecting solidly. A grunt followed, the grip loosened, and I ran blindly toward the kitchen, searching frantically for the back door. In near total darkness, I slammed painfully into the kitchen island, but eventually found the handle. Bursting into the cool night, the expansive lawn stretched ahead, edged by dense trees. Damp grass soaked my socks as I sprinted towards cover. Behind me, the back door slammed open, a deep voice yelling, "Stop!" That voice propelled me faster into the forest, branches scratching my skin, roots threatening to trip me. I ran without direction, driven by sheer terror, until lights appeared through the trees a house. Relief flooded me until, with a jolt, I realized it was the manor itself. In panic, I'd circled back. Then I saw a new arrival, a police car. I sprinted toward it, waving frantically, screaming for help. The front door opened, revealing a policeman and Mrs. Harrington. "Emily, dear," she called, rushing toward me. "We've been so worried. There's someone inside. An intruder," I gasped. Mrs. Harrington and the officer exchanged knowing glances. "Emily," she said softly, "that's not an intruder. It's just my husband, William." At his name, a tall, slender man appeared, his kind face sporting a fresh bruise. "I'm so sorry to have frightened you," he apologized sincerely, the voice from the woods now gentle. "I should have let you know I was home early." Embarrassed, I stammered apologies, feeling foolish. William laughed softly, touching his cheek. "You've got quite an arm," he teased kindly. Mrs. Harrington embraced me gently. "Come inside, you're trembling. We'll sort everything out." As we returned indoors, the absurdity of my panic struck me, and I laughed nervously. But later, tucked in bed, listening to the Harringtons move quietly through the manor, doubt crept in. What if it hadn't been William? What if the next time it wasn't a harmless misunderstanding? Pulling the blankets tighter, I shivered at the thought of how many hidden spaces the old manor held, places where something or someone could easily hide. That night, sleep was slow in coming. Morning broke through thick branches, illuminating my dire realization I was utterly lost. This solo trek in the Cascade Mountains had quickly turned nightmarish, promising to worsen. I've always been confident outdoors. Growing up near Seattle, I'd spent endless hours exploring forests. Yet now, standing uncertainly, mud caking my boots, a chill unrelated to the mountain air settled deep in my bones. The trail I'd followed vanished gradually, leaving me stranded among identical towering trees and rocky slopes. "Stay calm, Alex," I whispered, suppressing panic. Deciding higher ground could offer clarity, I climbed, muscles protesting, water dwindling. Approaching the ridge, human voices reached me, filling me with hope. Perhaps fellow hikers? Relief quickly shifted to anxiety. These voices weren't cheerful. They were tense, aggressive, accompanied by harsh metallic clangs. Moving silently, a skill learned from hunting with my father, I crouched behind a large rock and peered carefully ahead. My heart froze at the sight. 3 rough-looking men stood around a makeshift set-up plastic containers. Tubing and propane tanks scattered carelessly. One measured a white powder. Another stirred a bubbling pot atop a small stove. My stomach churned. I didn't need chemistry lessons to understand exactly what was unfolding before me. This was a hidden drug lab deep in the remote wilderness, a place no one was supposed to find, except somehow I had. Holding my breath, I didn't dare move. These men were dangerous. It was obvious they wouldn't simply let me go if I was discovered. "Damn it, Nick," one man suddenly shouted, making me jump. "I told you to watch the heat. You're gonna ruin the batch." "Screw off, Pete," replied the man stirring the pot irritably. "I know what I'm doing." "Quiet, both of you," snapped the third man, clearly their leader. "We don't need anyone hearing us. Last thing we want is a ranger poking around. If only they knew how close to reality they were. I needed to escape, but which direction? I was already lost, and now I had criminals to dodge. One careless step, one snapping twig, and I'd be exposed. Slowly, cautiously, I began inching backward, heart pounding deafeningly in my ears. Crack! A broken branch beneath my foot shattered the forest silence. What was that? One man barked sharply. "Probably just wildlife," another responded uncertainly. "Check it out," ordered the leader. "Could be an animal drawn to the smell." I heard footsteps approaching my hiding place. Panic surged through me. and instinct took over. I sprinted blindly, no longer caring about stealth, only escape. Behind me, I heard their startled shouts. They'd spotted me. I ran faster than I thought possible, branches clawing at my face and arms, pain stinging with every stride. Yet the fear pushed me onward. My lungs were on fire, my legs screaming for relief, but I refused slow. Suddenly, the earth vanished beneath my feet as I stumbled down a steep incline, tumbling violently until I crashed to a painful halt. Breathless and disoriented, I barely had time to register my injuries when their voices echoed nearby, spurring me painfully back to my feet. The dense trees blurred around me as I continued my desperate flight. I lost track of time. Minutes felt like hours. Eventually, the forest abruptly ended, revealing a paved road. Relief nearly overwhelmed me, but distant shouts reminded me I wasn't safe yet. Scanning desperately, I saw no vehicles. With no alternative, I bolted down the road, praying it led to civilization and safety. Time became meaningless, the relentless rhythm of my pounding feet the only measure. Finally, like a vision, a gas station appeared ahead, its neon lights glowing inviting. I staggered into the parking area, startling an elderly man fueling his truck. "Help," I croaked weakly. "Please call the police." He took in my battered appearance and rushed into the store, returning quickly with a clerk already dialing 911. I collapsed onto the ground, legs giving out. As sirens wailed closer, I finally relaxed, safe at last. The aftermath blurred into interviews and medical checks. Police discovered the abandoned lab, but no sign of the men who had vanished into the wilderness. Returning to the forest afterward wasn't easy. It had become a place of fear rather than peace. Slowly, though, I reclaimed my confidence outdoors, ever mindful that even in isolation, one is never truly alone. That knowledge is not always comforting. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly, casting eerie shadows along the empty halls as I completed my rounds. Another routine night shift at Riverdale Mall, or so I believed. Little did I know, soon I'd face unimaginable terror in a place I'd always seen as ordinary. I'm Jason, and I've been the night guard at Riverdale Mall for 3 years now. Normally it's monotonous. Patrol, check locks, and ensure no overnight guests. But tonight felt different from the start. Janet, an older cleaner, was just leaving as I arrived. "Quiet tonight, Jason," she smiled warmly. "See you tomorrow." If only she'd known. I settled into my small office, scanning the security monitors briefly. Everything seemed calm. Around midnight, my first patrol began, footsteps echoing eerily through the deserted corridors. Storefront mannequins seemed to watch me, their lifeless eyes unsettling. Approaching the central fountain, a soft, scraping sound froze me in my tracks. "Hello?" My voice echoed without reply. "Probably old plumbing," I murmured, pushing aside unease. Yet the feeling lingered as shadows grew longer and sounds became louder. Returning nervously to my office, I glimpsed sudden movement on a monitor, a fleeting shadow. I rewound the footage, heart racing as a figure darted across the corner of the screen. Someone was inside, armed with a flashlight and a heavy wrench. I hesitated about calling for help. What if I'd imagined it? Deciding to investigate first, I ventured out cautiously. Every shadow seemed threatening as I approached an electronics store. The security gate was slightly open, barely enough room beneath. Heart hammering, I ducked inside, flashlight shaking. "Security, show yourself." A crash from the back sent adrenaline spiking through me. swinging my flashlight toward it. I caught brief movement. Another noise. Closer now, they were playing games with me. Suddenly, store lights flickered to life. Blinded briefly, I opened my eyes to 3 masked figures blocking the exit. They held knives and crowbars, spreading out menacingly. "Looks like we've got company," the leader sneered. Holding up my wrench defensively, I said, "You're trespassing. Leave now, and I won't call the police." Their cold laughter echoed mockingly. "We're not leaving, and neither are you," he threatened, stepping forward. Desperate, I hurled a nearby laptop at them, buying a moment to escape. I raced through aisles, overturning displays to slow pursuit. Sliding under the security gate, I dashed into the mall. Shouts behind me grew louder as they closed in. I ducked into a maze-like service corridor, hoping to lose them. But footsteps followed relentlessly, echoing off narrow walls. Eventually, I stumbled into the basement amid deafening machinery. Crouched behind a generator, I struggled to think clearly. I needed help, but my phone was unreachable. Nearby movement made me freeze as a flashlight beam searched inches from my hiding spot. My heart stopped, but the beam soon moved on. Taking my chance, I crept toward the stairs. Suddenly, a hand grabbed me. I swung my wrench, connecting solidly, then sprinted upstairs without looking back. Bursting into the main mall, I spotted the exit and ran full speed, slamming painfully into a locked door. Frantically fumbling with keys, I heard footsteps approaching. Just as panic overwhelmed me, the lock clicked open, and I exploded into the cool night air. Across the street, I stumbled into an all-night diner, begging the startled waitress to call the police. The subsequent investigation yielded no arrests, just signs of forced entry and chaos. I resigned immediately, unable to shake the trauma. Now, late at night, echoes of pursuit still haunt my dreams. Forever wondering, what if I'd been just seconds slower? Our campsite fire crackled softly, failing to dispel the unnerving silence that blanketed the forest. What began as a tranquil weekend getaway for me and Rachel was rapidly spiraling into a horrifying ordeal. Staring into the darkness beyond our small campfire, I couldn't shake the unsettling sensation of being watched. Little did I know our peaceful camping trip was about to spiral into a frantic struggle for survival. Maybe solitude isn't always what it's cracked up to be. Our first day was idyllic. We wandered through lush forests, alive with the calls of birds, setting our tent beside a gently flowing creek. That evening we roasted marshmallows by the fire, pointing out constellations overhead. But on the second day, the mood shifted. We were hiking up a nearby hill when Jessica paused, alarmed. "Did you hear that?" she asked nervously. "Hear what?" I strained to listen, but noticed nothing unusual. "I thought someone shouted," she said, eyes anxiously scanning the woods. "Probably other campers," I reassured, though unease crept into my mind. Continuing on, the carefree atmosphere evaporated. Every rustle in the leaves startled us. Jessica stayed close, frequently glancing behind. The feeling of being followed grew stronger as we returned to camp. I saw nothing, but my anxiety persisted. Back at camp, the sunset bathed the sky in orange and pink hues, yet couldn't dispel our nervousness. "Maybe we should leave," Jessica suggested as we cooked dinner. "This place gives me chills." Pride made me hesitate. "Let's stay tonight," I said, trying to sound confident. "It's probably nothing. We wanted an adventure, right?" Jessica reluctantly agreed, clearly unconvinced. Honestly, I felt the same. Darkness fell, and we sat tensely by the fire, whispering as if afraid to attract attention. Every sound around us intensified our anxiety. Just past midnight, we heard it a low whistle, answered from the opposite side of our clearing. Jessica clutched my arm, terrified. "Ryan," she whispered, "someone's out there?" Before I could reply, a shadowy figure stepped into the firelight, a rugged man holding a rifle. "Well, well," he growled, eyeing us coldly. "Looks like we've got visitors." Several more men appeared, armed and intimidating. "We don't want trouble," I stammered, slowly standing and pulling Jessica up. "We'll leave right now." Their leader chuckled harshly. "Afraid we can't let you do that." "Can't risk you telling folks about our business." My mind raced. What business? Then it dawned on me, drugs. We'd stumbled onto something dangerous. "We haven't seen anything." Jessica pleaded desperately. "Please, just let us go." The leader shook his head slowly. "Too late for that. You're staying with us." The men moved closer, encircling us. Spotting a rope in one's hand ignited my survival instincts. Grabbing a burning log from the fire, I hurled it toward the closest attacker. He yelled, startled by scattering embers. "Run!" I shouted, pushing Jessica into the dark woods. Branches whipped our faces as we fled blindly, hearts pounding furiously. Behind us, angry shouts echoed. They knew the terrain better and were gaining fast. Jessica stumbled, but I caught her quickly. "Keep moving," I urged, dragging her onward. Bursting from the trees, we skidded to a halt at a steep gorge carved by our earlier tranquil stream. Flashlights flickered behind us. Our pursuers were closing in fast. "We have to jump," I said urgently, pointing to the narrow gap. Jessica hesitated briefly, then nodded resolutely. "On 3, I instructed, grasping her hand tightly. 1, 2, 3. We leaped, suspended briefly above the roaring stream before crashing onto the opposite bank. Pain shot through my ankle, but adrenaline propelled us forward into cover. Shouts echoed behind us, frustrated but delayed by the ravine. Exhausted yet driven by sheer terror, we pressed onward, freezing at every noise. Finally, dawn broke, bringing distant sounds of traffic. Relief overwhelmed us as we stumbled onto a road, frantically flagging down the first vehicle, an old pickup driven by a bewildered farmer. At the police station, our frantic story prompted an immediate search. Though authorities found no trace of the men or their illicit operation, perhaps they'd quickly abandoned the site. It took months to overcome the nightmares and regain a sense of safety. Jessica and I stayed together, bound by the horror we survived, but camping lost its appeal. Some fears linger, too primal to ignore. On restless nights, the sinister whistles still echo vividly in my mind, a chilling reminder of secrets the wilderness may still hide, awaiting unsuspecting visitors seeking tranquility. On restless nights, the sinister whistles still echo vividly in my mind, a chilling reminder of secrets. The highway stretched endlessly into the darkness, illuminated only by my truck's headlights. I'd driven for hours, interrupted occasionally by the flash of road signs or glowing animal eyes. Pick. I'm Tom, a trucker who's seen plenty in 20 years on the road. But nothing prepared me for that night. Hauling electronics from Chicago to Phoenix, I listened absent-mindedly to late-night radio, amused by stories of alien encounters. That's when I spotted him, a solitary figure on the roadside, thumb raised. Though hesitant, something compelled me to stop, perhaps loneliness or fatigue. Pulling over, I opened the door. "Where you headed?" "West." he answered quietly. Far as you're going? He was younger, maybe early 30s, lean with short hair and sharp eyes, clutching a small duffel bag protectively. I'm Tom, I offered. Steve, he replied curtly. We drove silently until his restless fidgeting caught my attention. Constantly glancing in mirrors, his suspicious behavior unnerved me. You all right? I asked, feigning calm. Fine, he snapped quickly. Just nervous in big trucks. I didn't buy it. My instincts screamed danger. Suddenly he spoke harshly. Pull over now. Confused, I glanced sideways. Blood-freezing Steve held a pistol aimed directly at me. Panic surged. Look, take my money, I stammered, thinking of my family. Just don't do anything rash. Steve chuckled coldly. Not about money, survival. Pull over. I complied, trembling. Steve snatched the keys, ordering me out at gunpoint. What do you want? I demanded shakily. Your truck, he replied flatly, and you'll drive. Forced back inside, my mind raced desperately. Could I overpower him or signal authorities? Don't try anything stupid, he warned darkly. I've got nothing left to lose, so behave. We drove westward for hours. Eventually, curiosity overcame me. Who's chasing you? Silence, then quietly, dangerous people. Want me dead. Why? I pressed. He laughed bitterly. I know too much secrets they'd kill to bury. I swallowed hard, gripping the wheel tighter. Whatever Steve was mixed up in, I'd stumbled directly into its path. Now I was caught up in this mess, whether I liked it or not. Dawn painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, but Mike suddenly stiffened beside me. We're being followed, he muttered, staring into the side mirror. I glanced at my own mirror, spotting a sleek black SUV rapidly closing in. Speed up, Mike shouted, gripping the gun so tightly his knuckles whitened. I pushed the accelerator to the floor, the truck roaring louder, but the SUV effortlessly matched our pace, pulling alongside us. The passenger window rolled down. Get down, Mike yelled, just as shots exploded from beside us. I ducked instinctively, fighting to keep control as bullets slammed into the truck. Mike leaned out, firing back. The cab filled with deafening noise and chaos. A sudden loud explosion made the truck jerk violently. They'd shot a tire. Fighting desperately with the steering wheel, I struggled to prevent us from flipping. There. Mike pointed frantically ahead. Head for that rest stop. The truck swayed wildly, but I managed to skid into the parking area, halting in a cloud of smoke and burning rubber. Run! Mike shouted, already jumping out. I didn't hesitate, scrambling from the cab as our pursuers slammed their doors, angrily shouting after us. We sprinted into the deserted rest area, startling an attendant half asleep behind the counter. Call the police, I gasped. They're armed. Before I could finish, the doors crashed open, 3 armed men rushing inside. The attendant screamed, diving behind the counter. Mike shoved me behind a snack display, opening fire. The place erupted into chaos, snacks and chips exploding around us, bullets filling the air. Crouched behind the shelf, heart racing uncontrollably, I wondered how I'd gotten here. How had an ordinary night become this nightmare? The gunfight seemed endless, but it ended as suddenly as it began. Silence filled the room, punctuated only by my ragged breathing. Peering around cautiously, I saw Mike standing, gun drawn. The attackers lay motionless. Nausea overwhelmed me as sirens wailed in the distance. Mike turned, his expression grave. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "This wasn't supposed to happen." Without another word, he vanished through the back door. Paralyzed, I sat amidst the chaos, waiting numbly for police to arrive. The following hours passed in a blur of statements and questioning. Investigators initially doubted my wild story, but evidence quickly backed me up. Mike, it turned out, was indeed a witness set to expose a notorious crime group. Those chasing us were assassins. Mike disappeared into the desert, never found again. Cleared of suspicion, I returned to the road, but my world had changed forever. I'm more careful now, mindful of hidden threats. And hitchhikers? Never again. The trouble began with my car's sudden, sputtering death on an isolated highway. As it rolled to a halt, dread twisted in my gut, unaware this breakdown would kickstart a horrifying ordeal. I'm Rachel, independent and usually fearless. That night, though, would test those qualities beyond their limits. Returning home from a promising job interview across state lines, I was exhausted but determined. Traffic was sparse, darkness absolute, when my car quit without warning. "No, come on," I muttered, turning the ignition repeatedly. Nothing. My phone had zero reception, leaving me stranded in oppressive darkness. Gathering courage, I stepped out, hoping maybe it was a simple issue. Yet the engine's confusing mess told me otherwise. As despair grew, headlights approached. Relief surged, maybe they had a working phone. An old pickup slowed, stopping nearby. A rugged, middle-aged man emerged, his flannel shirt and weathered hands suggesting local familiarity. "Trouble?" he called, approaching. "Engine died," I admitted anxiously. "Know anything about cars?" He chuckled warmly. "Let me take a look." After examining briefly, he shook his head. "Timing belt's gone. Can't fix it here." My heart sank. "Do you have a phone?" "Mine's dead." "Sorry," he shrugged. "Don't carry one, but I can drive you into town. Mechanic there'll help." Instinct screamed against accepting, but options were few. "Thanks," I reluctantly agreed. "I'm Rachel." "I'm Carl," he replied, smiling oddly. As we drove, Carl asked casual questions, where I lived, my destination. His friendliness felt increasingly forced, raising suspicion. After 20 minutes without reaching civilization, anxiety peaked. "How much farther?" I asked nervously. Carl's eyes hardened chillingly. "We're not heading into town, Rachel." Fear surged instantly. Where are we going?" Ignoring me, Carl accelerated rapidly. Panicked, I grabbed the door handle, but it was locked, childproof. "Let me out, please," I begged desperately. "I won't tell anyone." He laughed coldly. "Nobody ever does." Realizing this wasn't his first abduction, my mind raced. Fight or crash? Vague or reason? Carl spoke again, chillingly casual. "Girls shouldn't trust strangers. Bad things happen. It'll be over soon." Refusing tears, I devised a risky plan. Feigning a violent coughing fit, I doubled over. "Can't breathe," I gasped convincingly. "Knock it off," Carl snapped uncertainly, slowing the truck. He pulled over, shaking me roughly. "Wake up!" Suddenly, I slammed my elbow upward, hearing a satisfying crunch as it connected with his nose. Carl screamed, reeling back. Snatching keys from the ignition, I clawed at the locked door. Carl grabbed my hair viciously. Screaming angrily, I turned, gouging his eyes fiercely. He released me with an agonized yell. Falling from the truck painfully, adrenaline drove me up instantly. I sprinted into darkness, keys gripped tightly. Carl cursed behind me, but youth and fear propelled me faster. I ran endlessly, every sound amplifying terror. "Call police," I panted desperately, collapsing. He tried. Adrenaline faded, leaving me trembling. The clerk dialed 911 without hesitation. Officers arrived quickly, their presence comforting. Carl was soon apprehended, stranded without keys, linked to numerous disappearances. Physically, I escaped lightly bruised. Mentally, scars lingered. For months, night drives terrified me, every approaching vehicle rekindling trauma, but survival taught me resilience. Now, sharing my story serves as a warning. Always trust your instincts, because sometimes danger hides behind kindling. Even now, whenever I drive down that lonely highway, I silently thank whatever force was watching over me that terrifying night and the inner strength I discovered when I needed it most. The old, abandoned Harrington factory stood before us, its crumbling walls and shattered windows staring blankly like empty eyes. We were just a group of friends chasing a thrill, amateur urban explorers seeking the perfect shot. None of us realized we were about to walk straight into a nightmare that would push us to our limits and leave permanent scars. I'm Ethan, and abandoned places have always intrigued me. The quiet desolation, nature reclaiming what humanity left behind. So when we heard about the deserted Harrington factory just outside town, it felt irresistible. There were 5 of us that day, myself, my best friend Nate, his girlfriend Mia, and our friends Alex and Jenna. We'd explored places before, but nothing so remote or imposing. Approaching the factory filled me with excitement, mixed with an unsettling dread. We squeezed through a rusty chain-link fence, our footsteps crunching on broken glass, scattered among weeds. "This place is creepy," Jenna murmured, snapping photos nervously. "Exactly why we're here," Alex said, trying to sound brave. Finding an entrance was easy. An old side door hung loosely from rusted hinges. Inside was dark and stale, dust particles drifting through sunbeams, streaming from broken ceilings. "Let's split up," Nate suggested eagerly. "Cover more ground." I hesitated, uneasy, but everyone agreed. We decided to meet back at the entrance in an hour. Flashlight in hand, I ventured deeper into the factory. Rusted machinery cast eerie shadows. Every creak and groan amplified my anxiety. I was exploring a cluster of abandoned offices when something startled me, a shuffle, heavier than any animal. "Guys?" I called nervously. Silence. A shadow moved swiftly past an open doorway, too large to be any of my friends. My pulse quickened. Curiosity overtook caution, and I stepped closer. Voices whispered harshly nearby. Carefully, I peeped around the corner, and my heart stopped. 3 men stood around stacks of crates, exchanging small packages. It was clearly some illicit exchange. I must have made a sound. One man's head snapped up, eyes locking with mine. Everything froze momentarily. "Hey!" he shouted, reaching for something hidden at his waist. Fear jolted me into motion, sprinting blindly through dark hallways, their angry shouts echoing behind. Desperation drove me as I crashed headlong into Nate, knocking us both down. "Ethan, what's wrong?" Nate groaned, disoriented. "No time," I gasped. "We have to find the others now." Alarmed, Nate followed without question. We found Mia quickly, and I hurriedly explained as we moved. Their frightened faces mirrored my own dread. "We need Alex and Jenna," Mia urged anxiously. A piercing scream echoed Jenna. We raced toward it, forgetting caution entirely. Bursting into a wide storage room, we saw Jenna cornered by one of the men. Alex lay unmoving nearby. Instinctively, I grabbed a rusty metal pipe and lunged forward, catching Jenna's attacker by surprise. He fell back, cursing. "Run!" I shouted, and Jenna didn't hesitate. Nate checked on Alex quickly. He's breathing, just unconscious, but the attacker was rising furious. His accomplices joined, blocking our escape. "You picked the wrong playground," one snarled menacingly. Frantically, I spotted a conveyor belt leading upwards. "Up there," I hissed urgently. Nate understood immediately. On his count, we lifted Alex between us and sprinted toward the belt. Mia and Jenna followed close. The criminals hesitated momentarily, enough for us to scramble up, sharp metal edges tearing our palms. We reached a maze-like series of catwalks above. Below stretched the dark labyrinth of machinery. "Where now?" Mia gasped breathlessly. "That door." I pointed urgently, spotting an exit sign dimly glowing. The structure shook beneath us as we raced across, pursued closely by shouting voices and pounding footsteps. Bursting through the door revealed a rusted fire escape. Without pause, we hurried down. Gunfire cracked behind us, echoing loudly, forcing us to move even faster. Stumbling, breathless, we finally hit solid ground and fled desperately toward Nate's car, hidden blocks away. We piled in, Alex gradually awake now, and Nate accelerated wildly. Miles passed before anyone spoke. "What just happened?" Jenna whispered shakily. I recounted everything I'd witnessed, the deal, the chase, our narrow escape. Reality sunk in heavily. "Should we call the police?" Mia asked hesitantly. Fear of retaliation silenced us all. Eventually, we swore to keep silent, to protect ourselves and our families. The experience haunted us deeply. Nightmares persisted. Everyday sounds triggered panic. Yet, strangely, it strengthened our bonds. We faced horror together and survived. Urban exploration lost its appeal, the risk now painfully clear. Still, abandoned buildings evoked dark curiosity and shivers, recalling the terrifying day our adventure nearly ended tragically. The Harrington factory remains, a grim reminder of hidden dangers lurking in forgotten places. If you ever consider exploring such ruins, remember our ordeal. Real threats often hide not in legends, but in stark reality. The flickering fluorescent bulb overhead buzzed irritably, casting unsettling shadows down the empty hallways. It was another routine night at Greenwood Office Complex, or so I'd thought. Little did I know, hours later I'd be fighting desperately for my life in a place I'd always considered safe. I'm Carlos, the night janitor at Greenwood for 5 years. It's mundane work, but the solitude lets me quietly dream up stories. Every hallway, office, and storage room was familiar territory, yet that night, my familiarity wouldn't protect me. Arriving at 10 p.m., I greeted late workers departing. Margie from accounting trudged out, clutching paperwork. "Another late night?" I asked sympathetically. "Tax season," she sighed wearily. "See you tomorrow." If only I'd known those casual words might be our last exchange. Working downward from the top floor, I cleaned mechanically, lost in creative thought. A sudden, loud crash shattered my reverie. My hand froze on the vacuum handle. The noise echoed from floors below, unexpected and troubling. Cautiously, I descended the emergency stairwell, heart racing. Approaching the 4th floor, whispers drifted through the door. Peeking carefully, my breath caught 3 men, dressed entirely in black. searched meticulously through desks and cabinets. Clearly intruders. Backing silently away, I knew calling for help was essential, but my phone sat locked in the basement. Office phones disabled nightly. The ground floor security office was my only hope. Quietly descending another floor, panic surged as footsteps echoed from above. They'd spotted me. Darting onto the third floor, I quickly hid inside a storage closet, barely breathing as flashlights swept past. "Nothing here," one man muttered impatiently. They moved onward, footsteps fading. Emerging cautiously, I hurried to the stairwell, nearly reaching safety when a voice shouted from above, "Stop him." Heart pounding, I sprinted downward, bursting into the lobby. The security office door was just ahead, but suddenly a shadowy figure blocked my path. Reflexively, I dodged, racing toward maintenance access beside stalled elevators. Scaling the ladder swiftly, I emerged onto the rooftop, gasping fresh night air, but there was no escape route. Trapped, I spun around as my pursuers climbed out, eyes glittering with menace. "No way out," one sneered coldly. "Please," I pleaded desperately, backing against the rooftop edge. "Let me go. I won't tell anyone." The lead intruder, tall and scarred, laughed chillingly. "Sorry, can't risk it." He lunged at me, and in that split second, time seemed to slow. His outstretched hand reached for me, his eyes filled with malice. I made a split-second decision and vaulted over the rooftop wall. For a terrifying instant, I was in free fall. Then my feet slammed onto something solid. It was a window-washing platform, forgotten by the crew earlier that day. Shouts of surprise echoed from above as I scrambled to work the controls. With a mechanical jolt, the platform began descending slowly down the building's side, but relief was short-lived. Peering upward, I saw one of the intruders aiming a gun over the rooftop edge. Instinctively, I pressed myself tightly against the building as a shot rang out, ricocheting off metal. A second bullet snapped one of the platform's cables, causing it to tilt precariously. That's when I spotted an open window just below, on the third floor. It was risky, but I had no choice. Timing my jump carefully as the platform swayed, I counted silently. 1, 2, 3, and leaped. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought I'd missed. Then my fingers painfully caught the window ledge. Using every ounce of strength, I pulled myself inside, collapsing onto the floor of an empty office. There was no time to rest. Frantic footsteps echoed down the stairwell. They were coming for me. I sprinted toward the elevators, knowing they'd be shut down, but the emergency phone inside might still work. Desperately, I pried open the doors, grabbed the phone, and dialed. 911, what's your emergency? Hearing those words nearly brought tears of relief. The next moments blurred together. I stayed hidden in the elevator, speaking quietly with the dispatcher, until the reassuring wail of sirens filled the air. The thieves, attempting to flee, were swiftly apprehended. Police revealed they'd been after confidential client records. Information dangerous enough to ruin countless lives. Wrapped in a shock blanket in the ambulance, I watched the criminals led away. The scarred leader caught my eye as officers loaded him into a squad car, his cold glare sending chills down my spine. Giving my statement to the police, I finally returned home to my worried wife and sleeping children, hugging them tighter than ever before, acutely aware of how close I'd come to never seeing them again. After that night, I stopped working evenings. My employers, partly from gratitude, partly guilt, offered me a day position with improved pay. Sometimes when leaving the building at day's end, I notice the night janitor beginning his shift. I feel a complicated mix of sympathy and unease, tempted to warn him about hidden dangers lurking in mundane routines. Instead, I simply nod, hoping his nights remain far less eventful than mine. Now, I never underestimate the beauty of the ordinary, keenly aware of how thin the line between safety and terror truly is. The soft glow from the television cast flickering shadows across the living room walls. Little Danny had fallen asleep hours ago, and I was settling in for a quiet evening babysitting. Scrolling absent-mindedly through my phone, a sudden notification appeared, chilling me to my core. In that instant, the cozy suburban house had become the setting of a terrifying game of survival. I'm Sarah, and I'd been babysitting the Parkers' 8-year-old son, Danny, for about 6 months. The job was easy, the Parkers kind, and the extra money helped with my college expenses. This particular Friday had seemed routine, but soon turned into a nightmare. Arriving around 7, I greeted Mr. and Mrs. Parker, who reminded me of Danny's usual routine. 1 hour on the tablet, parental controls on, Mrs. Parker said warmly. No worries, I reassured her confidently. Dinner with Danny passed normally, filled with cheerful chatter about school and toys. At bedtime, though, Danny seemed unusually quiet. Everything okay? I asked gently. Sarah, is it okay to have secret friends? His voice was uncertain, troubling. What do you mean, secret friends? I pressed cautiously. Danny shrugged nervously. Someone I talk to, but it's a secret. Alarm bells rang immediately. Who is this friend, Danny? How do you talk to them? But he rolled away, pulling his covers tighter. Never mind. Good night. Worried, I returned downstairs and inspected his tablet. At first glance, everything seemed ordinary child-friendly apps and games. But then I noticed an unfamiliar app disguised as a harmless puzzle game. Opening it, dread surged through me. It was a messaging app. The recent conversation made my blood run cold. A user named Puzzle Master had sent unsettling messages. Remember, Danny, this is our secret. Can't wait to meet you in person, maybe tonight. Hands trembling, I grabbed my phone to call the police, but a new message flashed across my screen from an unknown number. Hello, Sarah. Danny's asleep, isn't he? Why don't you let me in for a nice surprise? Terror gripped me. He was already here watching. I quickly locked all doors, pulled the curtains, and silenced my phone. Another message arrived. Don't be rude, Sarah. I've come so far to meet you both. Determined to protect Danny, I silently climbed upstairs, gently waking him. Danny, we're going to play a quiet game of hide and seek. Stay hidden until I come get you. Understand? He nodded sleepily, sensing my anxiety. After hiding him in his parents' closet, I returned downstairs, clutching a kitchen knife. Another chilling message appeared. Getting impatient. Maybe I'll just come inside. Glass shattered softly at the back door. He'd broken in. Holding my breath, I pressed against the wall near the kitchen, heart racing. Footsteps moved slowly through the house. Danny? A soft voice coaxed. It's me, Puzzle Master. A shadow approached the kitchen doorway. Without thinking, I swung my knife, slicing into his arm. He staggered back, revealing a tall, scruffy man whose friendly online persona now appeared monstrous. Enraged, he lunged at me, overpowering my struggles, his hand squeezing my throat. Darkness edged my vision. Then sirens pierced the night. His grip faltered momentarily. Seizing my chance, I drove my knee upward forcefully, breaking free and stumbled outside just as police arrived. The attacker, later identified as Greg Hoffman, was quickly subdued. Danny was found safe. I sat numbly in an ambulance, shaking as the Parkers arrived, their gratitude overwhelming. The experience changed me profoundly. I stopped babysitting, haunted by trauma, yet began volunteering to teach online safety. Passing the Parkers' home still fills me with dread and pride. Despite darkness in the world, I learned hope endures if we're willing to confront it. The sharp, chemical smell stung my nostrils as I crouched behind fallen timber, heart hammering loudly in my chest. Our peaceful hike had suddenly transformed into a frantic struggle for survival. Never did I imagine we'd stumble onto a hidden meth lab deep within the forest, hunted by dangerous criminals. My name is Luke, and I'd always enjoyed outdoor adventures. When friends Sam and Emma proposed a hiking trip in the Ozarks, I eagerly agreed. The journey started beautifully fresh air, sea. Late on the second day, though, we veered off the marked path, intrigued by an odd chemical odor. Breaking through dense bush revealed a run-down cabin surrounded by suspicious equipment, plastic barrels, propane tanks, tubing. "Oh my God," Emma whispered, eyes wide. "Is that a drug lab?" Before we could respond, angry voices erupted from inside. "Hide!" I hissed urgently, dropping behind a log. Two rough-looking men emerged, arguing heatedly. Panic set in. We'd wandered straight into trouble. These men were burly, rough-looking, with hard eyes and worn clothing, and they were armed. "We need to get out of here," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. I nodded slowly, starting to back away. But as I moved, my backpack snagged on a branch, snapping it loudly. The sound echoed through the clearing. Instantly, the men spun around. "What was that?" one growled. "Probably just an animal," the other said uncertainly. We froze, barely breathing, praying they wouldn't investigate further. For a moment, luck seemed on our side. The men turned back to their discussion. Then Jake sneezed. It wasn't loud, but in the tense silence, it might as well have been a gunshot. "Someone's out there," a man shouted. Without hesitation, we bolted, crashing through bushes, stealth forgotten. Shouts and the sound of pursuit chased us. "Split up," I yelled to Jake and Sarah. "Meet back at the car." It was risky, but splitting might confuse them. I veered left while Jake and Sarah sprinted right. I ran harder than ever, branches scratching my face, roots trying to trip me. My lungs burned, legs heavy, driven only by sheer panic. ... Glancing back, I saw one pursuer barely 20 yards away, face twisted in fury. Distracted, I tripped, tumbling down a steep incline, ankle wrenching painfully. "Got you now," the man snarled, emerging above me. ... Desperately, I grabbed dirt and leaves, hurling them into his eyes. He cursed, temporarily blinded, giving me time to stagger away. Pain shot through my ankle, but adrenaline kept me moving. With no sense of direction, I just ran. Darkness closed in, the forest thickening around me. I didn't know how long I'd been running, minutes or hours. Every noise made me jump. Finally, exhausted, I spotted a small cave behind vines and dove in, pressing against the back wall, forcing my breathing quiet. Outside, heavy footsteps approached. "I know you're here somewhere," the man growled, far too close. I froze, eyes shut tight, willing invisibility. He paused right outside, silence stretching endlessly. Finally, he moved away. When silence returned, I cautiously left the cave. Darkness had fully fallen, shadows engulfing the forest. I limped onward, uncertain, but determined to find Jake and Sarah. Each snapping twig spiked my fear again. Hours later, a distant sound lifted my spirits, a stream. If I followed it, I might find the trail. Stumbling toward the water, I suddenly collided with Sarah. We both stifled screams, then hugged desperately. "Alex," Sarah whispered, tears in her eyes. I thought, "I'm okay," I assured her, despite my throbbing ankle. "Have you seen Jake?" She shook her head sadly. "We got separated. I've been hiding, trying to figure things out." Together, we followed the stream, hoping it led somewhere safe. Every rustle made us jump, paranoia gripping tightly. As dawn broke, we finally heard vehicles, a distant road with flashing lights. Police. Jake had made it back and called for help. Officers had been searching all night. As we emerged from the woods, escorted by police, I glanced back at the forest, knowing dangerous men still lurked there. Soon, though, they'd face justice. Jake had made it back and called for help. Officers had been searching all night. As we emerged from the woods, escorted by police, I glanced back at the forest, knowing dangerous men still lurked there. Soon, though, they'd face justice. The aftermath blurred through police interviews and medical checkups. Authorities raided the lab, arresting our pursuers. Local media labeled us heroes, though it never felt heroic. It took months for nightmares to fade, for ordinary noises not to send my heart racing. Yet eventually, I returned to hiking. The forest had revealed its dangers, but also my inner strength. Now, every hike carries a reminder. Danger can appear anywhere, but so can the human spirit's resilience. Golden sunlight bathed the forest, but a sudden chill crept down my spine as I adjusted my camera lens. Something was watching me, glowing eyes piercing through the shadows. At that moment, I realized I was no longer the observer, but the prey. My name's Jack, and I'm a wildlife photographer. Over years spent capturing rare animals across remote regions, I had encountered plenty, but nothing prepared me for what awaited in the Pacific Northwest's dense wilderness. Rumors spoke of an unknown creature, humanoid yet covered in thick fur, with luminous eyes. Many dismissed it as legend, but experience had taught me legends often held truth. Days of meticulous tracking revealed only ordinary wildlife until sunset on my fifth day. Perched in my blind, camera ready, I watched a clearing marked by peculiar tracks. Twilight approached, and I considered leaving when a deep, eerie growl resonated through the trees. Raising my lens, I scanned and froze. A pair of reflective eyes stared back, set in a face almost human yet undeniable. Heart racing, I snapped photos rapidly. The shutter echoed unnaturally loud, and instantly the eyes vanished. Checking my shots, one image stood out starkly clear, a creature whose intelligence gleamed unmistakably in its gaze. This was something entirely new. Nightfall made escape urgent. Quietly packing gear, I prepared to descend until an otherworldly scream split the darkness, terrifyingly close. Frozen mid-descent, my heart pounded as heavy movement barreled toward me. Panicking, I scrambled down and ran blindly, branches slashing my face, roots threatening each step. The silent pursuit behind me felt deliberate. This thing was playing with me. Fear fueled me until suddenly the earth vanished beneath my feet. I tumbled violently down a ravine, landing painfully near a rushing river. An idea sparked. Water might hide my scent. Limping badly, I waded into icy currents, nearly swept away. Midstream, the weight of my gear threatened to drown me. Somehow, reaching the opposite bank, I crawled ashore, shivering and breathless. Staggering through the night, paranoia haunted me at every turn. By dawn, exhausted, I found shelter in a hollow log, drifting briefly into restless sleep. Waking, disoriented but relieved, I cautiously emerged. My GPS indicated my camp was 5 miles away, a daunting trek on a damaged ankle, the journey blurred through pain and vigilance. Every sound reignited my terror. Reaching my untouched camp brought immense relief. Quickly packing, I pushed desperately toward my vehicle. Seeing my car felt miraculous. I drove away recklessly, leaving the nightmare behind. Only miles later, safely distant, did excitement begin replacing fear. I'd witnessed something extraordinary, holding undeniable proof in my camera. Calling my editor immediately, I said hoarsely, "Mark, you're not going to believe this." The resulting frenzy drew scientists, cryptozoologists, and thrill seekers, yet no definitive evidence surfaced again. But I knew the truth. I'd glimpsed something incredible, rewriting our understanding of nature, and survived to tell it. Sometimes late at night, I still wake up covered in sweat, haunted by the memory of that unearthly howl echoing in my ears. I've never returned to those woods, and I never will. Some mysteries I've realized are better left undisturbed. It changed me, reminded me that humans aren't always the apex predators we believe ourselves to be. Somewhere deep in those forests, something watches and waits, a chilling reminder that wild places still exist where we're not in control. The first scratch in the wall was so faint I nearly missed it. As I ran my fingers over the rough surface, dread filled my stomach. Something was inside the wall of this old cabin alive and moving. As shadows lengthened with the sunset, the realization dawned on me. I was trapped here, and I wasn't alone. My name's Daniel, and I've always enjoyed solitude. When I inherited my great-uncle's remote cabin, it seemed the perfect place to escape the city stress. Memories flooded back as I approached the scent of Uncle Frank's pipe, his hearty laugh. Initially, the cabin felt peaceful, an ideal retreat into nature. The tranquility ended on the 4th night, when scratching sounds disturbed my sleep. At first, I dismissed it as rodents, but it became louder and more deliberate, moving along the walls. In daylight, I discovered long, deep gouges etched into the wooden panels, far too large to be from a mouse or even a raccoon. Unease settled over me, turning every creak and groan into a source of anxiety. That night, the scratching escalated into heavy thuds within the walls. Grabbing a flashlight, my pulse quickened as I traced the noise to the old fireplace. Approaching cautiously, the noise abruptly ceased, replaced by a guttural growl inhuman and terrifying. Panic surged as I stumbled backward, barely suppressing a scream. As dawn broke, I fled to town, stopping at a local diner, pale and shaken. Betty, an older waitress, eyed me worriedly and listened as I described my experience. Her expression darkened when I mentioned Uncle Frank's cabin. "That old cabin?" she whispered, glancing nervously around. "People say something's always lived in those walls. Some spirit or creature nobody knows for sure." Her warning resonated, but my curiosity drove me deeper. Determined, I bought supplies and an axe, returning to the cabin as night fell. The scratching started immediately. Steeling myself, I swung the axe into the wall, wood splintering loudly. An ear-splitting roar erupted, shaking the cabin. The wall burst open, revealing something monstrous. Humanoid yet covered in matted fur, eyes gleaming with unnatural intelligence. Frozen momentarily, our eyes locked. Then, with terrifying speed, it lunged. Swinging wildly, I felt the axe strike solid flesh, drawing an enraged howl. Scrambling toward the door, a clawed hand seized my ankle, dragging me back. Desperately, I kicked free, stumbling toward my car. It chased me relentlessly, its breath hot on my neck. Reaching my vehicle, I fumbled desperately with the keys just as the creature slammed into me. We hit the ground, tangled and fighting. In desperation, I grabbed a stone, smashing it against the creature's skull. It recoiled, dazed. Seizing my chance, I leaped into the car, locking doors as I sped away, its furious howl echoing behind me. I drove non-stop until city lights appeared. Trembling, I never returned to the cabin, eventually selling it off quietly. Yet the memory lingers, the glowing eyes, the savage intelligence. It left me wondering what else might hide in dark, forgotten places. I've learned to fear old cabins and their hidden secrets. After all, sometimes walls really do have eyes and claws. My name's Sarah, and at that time I was drifting aimlessly across the country, trying to find myself. Exhausted, I stopped at the nearly deserted motel, unaware of the eyes watching from behind a curtained window. Entering the office, a rough-looking man named Earl greeted me. His cold gaze made my skin crawl as he handed over a room key attached to a faded plastic star. "Enjoy your stay," he rasped unpleasantly. My room, isolated at the motel's far end, felt immediately unsettling. Inside, shabby furniture and stained walls reinforced the oppressive atmosphere. Noticing an odd hole hidden partially by a tacky painting, I investigated and felt sickened to discover it peered straight into the neighboring room. Quickly replacing the painting, I tried dismissing it as wear and tear. Sleep eluded me, as every noise heightened my paranoia. A faint, scratching sound woke me in the early hours, and dread flooded back. Paralyzed, I watched in horror as the painting shifted aside, revealing an eye pressed against the hole. My gasp startled whoever was watching, and hurried footsteps retreated. Panicked, I dressed frantically, determined to escape. Acting on instinct, I swung my bag hard into his face. He staggered, momentarily dazed. I sprinted to my car, but Earl caught up, spinning me violently around. As his knife moved toward me, I kneed him sharply between the legs. The knife clattered to the ground, and I shoved him away, scrambling into my car. Tires screeching, I sped away, watching Earl shrink in my rearview mirror. Hours later, trembling uncontrollably, I called the police from a busy truck stop. My account prompted an investigation revealing multiple missing person cases linked to the motel. I'd narrowly escaped becoming another statistic. That night changed me permanently. Now, I see ordinary places with wary eyes, understanding that evil often hides behind mundane facades, waiting patiently for its next victim. Going back years, investigators discovered evidence that Earl had been spying on guests through concealed holes in the walls, meticulously choosing victims he thought no one would miss: solo travelers, runaways, those down on their luck. Eventually, Earl and his wife, who had assisted him, were arrested. Though the full scope of their crimes was never entirely made public, the rumors were terrifying. I gave multiple statements and testified at their trial. It was exhausting and emotionally draining, But I was determined to see justice done, not just for myself, but for every victim who couldn't speak up. Years had passed since that nightmare at the Starlight Motel, yet I still have sleepless nights. I dream of Earl's cold, calculating eyes, reliving the terror of being hunted. Motels are unbearable now. Identical doors and flickering neon vacancy signs instantly revive that trauma. But I've grown stronger too. I've learned to trust my instincts, to heed that inner voice warning me when something feels wrong. I now understand that ordinary-looking people and places often hide the darkest secrets. I still travel, still explore, but now with vigilant eyes wide open. Each time I drive past a lonely motel, I silently pray for anyone who might be trapped inside, unseen and unheard, battling unknown horrors. Because the truth is, you never truly know what's happening behind closed doors or who might be watching from the shadows. The moment I spotted the ornate mask, something inside me screamed danger. But surrounded by laughter and music at the Halloween party, I ignored my instincts, a mistake I'd regret deeply. Those masks weren't merely decorations. They concealed murderous intentions. I'm Alex, and Halloween had always been my favorite holiday. The costumes, the mysterious atmosphere, the thrill of stepping away from reality. So when my friend John invited me to an exclusive masquerade party at some rich guy's mansion, I eagerly accepted. It's going to be epic, Jen promised excitedly. Everyone has to wear masks the entire night. I spent weeks preparing my steampunk-inspired costume, complete with a bronze and leather half-mask. Jen picked me up in her beat-up Corolla, and as we drove out of the city, the mansions became larger and more distant from each other. Finally, a massive Gothic estate appeared, adorned with flickering jack-o'-lanterns and shadowy gargoyles. "Told you it was epic," Jen said, adjusting her feathered mask as we stepped inside. The party was bustling people in elaborate costumes, masked waiters serving drinks, and loud music echoing from hidden speakers. At the bar, an eerie feeling prickled the back of my neck. I glanced over my shoulder, catching sight of a figure in a red cloak and white plague doctor mask staring intently. "Creepy," I murmured to Jeanne. "Oh, they're part of the staff or something," she shrugged. "Adds to the vibe." But unease lingered as I noticed more red-cloaked figures, silent observers scattered throughout the party. Just as I considered leaving, the music abruptly stopped. A man wearing a lavish golden mask stepped onto a stage. "Welcome, guests," he announced smoothly. "Tonight we have special entertainment." Suddenly, red-cloaked figures surged into action, grabbing panicked guests and dragging them toward hidden exits. "What the hell?" Jun gasped beside me. Before I could respond, a powerful hand seized my arm. I struggled futilely against its iron grip. Chaos erupted around us, screams and shouts filling the air as partygoers fought to escape. Dragged through a hidden door behind a tapestry, I heard the golden-masked man speak again. "Don't be afraid. Think of this as a game of hide and seek. Survive until dawn, and you win your freedom." His words sent chills down my spine. This wasn't entertainment, it was a hunt. I was shoved down a narrow staircase into a dim cellar crowded with terrified guests. As a hidden passage opened, the golden-masked voice echoed through speakers. "Your hunt begins now." Good luck. We bolted into the dark labyrinth beneath the mansion. Twisting passages split endlessly, and soon I found myself in a large circular chamber, empty except for a dry, cobweb-covered fountain. Other frightened guests gathered there, confused and desperate. "We need a way out," someone whispered urgently. Before anyone could strategize, footsteps echoed through a nearby tunnel, accompanied by the sinister scrape of metal on stone. Panic exploded, scattering everyone. I fled blindly, driven purely by survival instinct. After endless running, I reached a dead-end room. Panicked, I spotted a small ventilation grate near the floor, pried it open, and crawled inside. I navigated the cramped, cold ducts for what felt like hours, terror gripping my heart at every faint noise. Finally, I emerged into a garage filled with expensive cars, spotting an exit door that led outside. Heart racing, I burst into the night air, sprinting until reaching the main road, collapsing in relief as distant sirens wailed. In the aftermath, the wealthy, twisted host was arrested, but many accomplices vanished. Along with countless victims, including John, authorities found miles of tunnels, and some bodies were never recovered. The nightmares persist, masked faces, endless tunnels, screams in the dark. But mostly, I dream of those left behind, wondering if bravery could have saved them. Halloween lost its magic, forever overshadowed by real-life horrors. Because sometimes monsters aren't costumes. They're painfully real, and sometimes they win. Mist hung thick over Lake Erie, rolling silently as I cast my line into the black water, seeking solitude but fighting terror instead. My name's Mike, and fishing these waters had always brought peace amidst life's chaos. This night began as usual, quiet, calm, isolated until midnight brought an eerie horn echoing across the water. Peering through dense fog, I saw an immense shape emerge, a silent, rusted steamer, unlike any modern ship. Curiosity overcame caution as I maneuvered closer, chills crawling over my skin when I recognized its faded name, Edmund Fitzgerald. A ghost ship, famously sunk decades ago in Lake Superior, stood impossibly before me. A desperate cry pierced the silence. "Help us." Fear warred with obligation. Reluctantly, I boarded the phantom vessel, climbing an algae-slicked ladder onto an empty, decaying deck. Thick air, heavy with rot and rust, engulfed me. Shadows danced on the edges of my vision unseen, watchful presences sending waves of dread through me. Panic surged as I discovered my ladder gone, leaving only fog below. Trapped, I stumbled toward the bridge, hoping to find escape or communication equipment. Forcing open a rusted door, I entered a scene frozen in time-ancient equipment, dials coated in grime. A slumped figure sat motionless at the helm. "Hey," I called, stepping closer. "Are you okay?" As I approached, dread coiled tighter inside me. This was no living captain, but a decayed corpse, hands forever clutching the wheel. Realization slammed into me. I was alone on a haunted ship, adrift in darkness, surrounded by unseen horrors. Desperate for an escape that might not exist. What I had mistaken for a living captain was only a skeleton draped in a decayed uniform. A scream caught in my throat as I stumbled back. This was impossible, insane. I had to be dreaming. A sound behind me made me whirl around. Blocking the doorway stood a ghastly figure, bloated, pale skin dripping water, eyes milky white, and seaweed tangled in his ragged clothes. "Welcome aboard," he gurgled as though speaking through water. "We've been waiting for you." I backed away, horrified. "What? What are you?" He smiled, revealing rows of jagged fish-like teeth. "We are the crew of the Edmund Fitzgerald, lost but never gone. Now you'll join us." More figures emerged behind him, each in various states of decay. advancing slowly toward me. Survival instincts took over. Grabbing a hefty logbook from a desk, I hurled it desperately at the lead apparition. It passed straight through him, but momentarily distracted them, giving me a chance to run. I pushed through their grasping, cold hands, racing blindly through the maze-like interior. Doors led to impossible places, corridors shifted endlessly. Eventually I burst onto a deck, but not the one I'd boarded. This deck tilted alarmingly, sea water surging violently over one side. The ship was sinking. The ghostly crew approached relentlessly. Without thinking, I sprinted to the railing and leapt into the icy water below. The shock of freezing temperatures stole my breath, and panic surged as I fought desperately to surface. When I finally gasped for air, the ghostly ship had vanished into the fog. Disoriented, I treaded water until I heard the distant rumble of an engine. Weakly, I cried for help, my voice nearly lost in the thick mist. Relief surged as a Coast Guard spotlight pierced through the fog, pulling me to safety. At the hospital, my frantic story about the ghost ship was met with skeptical glances, dismissed officially as hallucinations due to toxic algae blooms. But I knew the truth. There had been numerous disappearances on foggy nights, exactly where I'd encountered that cursed vessel. I no longer venture onto Lake Erie, yet sometimes when the mist thickens at night, I'm drawn to the shoreline, listening to that mournful horn call, knowing the Edmund Fitzgerald still sails, seeking souls to join its cursed crew. The wind howled as my car sputtered and died, stranding me amidst a swirling blizzard. I hadn't realized my desperate search for shelter would lead me into the grasp of a madman. The cabin I'd hoped would save me quickly became my prison of terror. My name's Claire, and I've always considered myself prepared, but nothing could have prepared me for that night. Returning from a work conference, I'd taken the scenic mountain route to clear my mind. A sudden storm blinded me, and my car broke down on a narrow mountain road. With no phone signal and temperatures dropping rapidly, staying put meant certain death. Battling fierce winds and relentless snow, I spotted a faint glow of cabin, promising shelter. I pounded desperately on the door until it swung open, revealing a tall, lean man with wild eyes and a rough beard. "Good heavens," he exclaimed, pulling me inside. "You'll freeze out there." My car broke down, I stammered, shivering violently. "Thank you for letting me in." He introduced himself as Jack, claiming to be a researcher studying mountain storms. He offered me tea and a couch for the night. Initially relieved, I gradually noticed something unsettling Jack's lingering gaze, strange pauses in his speech, and a peculiar intensity. My suspicions deepened when I stumbled upon a partially open door, revealing a horrific scene, a terrified, bound person struggling silently. Before I could react, Jack appeared, gripping me with iron strength. "You shouldn't have seen that," he whispered, his voice disturbingly calm. "Now you're part of the experiment." He tied me beside the other captive, ranting about unnatural storms and mysterious forces in the mountains. Terror blurred my senses as he injected us repeatedly, scribbling notes in manic obsession. But desperation sharpened my resolve. I secretly worked at loosening my ropes until finally they gave way. Seizing a heavy glass jar, I smashed it over Jack's head. He collapsed, unconscious. Quickly freeing the other victim, a missing hiker, we fled into the freezing night, stumbling until a passing truck rescued us. Police later discovered Jack's horrific research, but never found him. Nightmares haunt me still, echoes of his twisted theories in every howling storm. I never traveled those remote roads anymore. I've learned painfully that monsters don't always lurk in the storm. They sometimes greet you warmly from behind a welcoming smile. The sharp snap of a twig froze us in our tracks. What had begun as a peaceful camping trip now turned sinister. We'd become targets in a deadly game, hunted through the darkening forest. My name's Aaron, and I've always adored nature. So when my boyfriend Tom suggested exploring the remote trails of the Ozark National Forest, I eagerly agreed. We meticulously planned our route, seeking solitude far from crowded tourist paths. Yet our tranquil escape shattered as darkness settled over our camp. The forest fell unnaturally silent, as though holding its breath. Then came another sound human footsteps, creeping closer. I caught a glimpse of movement between the trees, a figure, shadowed and watchful. Fear pulsed through me. "Tom," I whispered urgently, gripping his arm, "someone's out there." Before he could reply, a sinister laugh echoed through the woods, chilling me to the core. We were not alone. The hunt had begun, and we had nowhere to run. We set out early on a crisp Friday morning, our backpacks loaded with supplies and our hearts filled with excitement. The first day was exactly as we'd envisioned, challenging hikes through untouched wilderness, breathtaking vistas, and the rare solitude that comes from being miles away from civilization. By sunset, we'd found an idyllic campsite, a secluded clearing nestled beside a gently flowing brook, surrounded by towering pines. We quickly pitched our tent, started a warm campfire, and settled down for a simple dinner beneath the emerging stars. "This is perfect," Tom said softly, his face illuminated by the flickering firelight. "Just us and nature. No phones, no distractions." I nodded, mesmerized by the clarity of the night sky, feeling completely at peace. But that peace shattered when, out of the darkness, voices drifted toward us. At first, I assumed it was other campers, but something about their tone, harsh and tense, sent a chill down my spine. Tom sensed it too. "Stay here," he whispered, grabbing our flashlight. "I'll check it out." I opened my mouth to protest, but he vanished into the shadows before I could speak. The moments stretched unbearably long, silence falling thick after the distant voices abruptly ceased. Used as panic began clawing at my throat, Tom crashed back into the campsite, eyes wide with fear. "We need to leave," he whispered urgently, already dismantling our tent. "What happened?" I asked, heart hammering in my chest. "Poachers," he hissed. "Armed, dangerous. We have to move now." With adrenaline fueling our movements, we packed swiftly and silently, extinguished our fire, and vanished into the dense forest. Tom's GPS showed a ranger station about 10 miles north, a grueling distance, but our only hope. The darkness slowed us, every sound magnified, every shadow ominous. Barely an hour into our flight, the distant voices returned, angry and searching. "Run!" Tom grabbed my hand, and we dashed recklessly through thick underbrush. Branches whipped our faces, roots grasped at our feet, and suddenly we tumbled down a steep embankment. Pain shot through my ankle as I landed. "I think it's sprained," I whispered, fighting back tears. "We have to hide," Tom said, helping me into thick bushes. We lay frozen as flashlight beams scoured the area above, voices growing frustrated until they moved on. Limping and leaning heavily on Tom, we pushed on at dawn, desperate to reach the ranger station. Behind us, the poachers resumed their search, systematically sweeping through the trees. "Up there," Tom pointed toward a rocky ridge. "We might spot the station." With agonizing effort, we climbed, my injured ankle screaming in protest. At the summit, relief surge smoke rising above distant treetops signaled the ranger station. But a sudden shout below shattered our momentary hope. "They've seen us," Tom said grimly. Scrambling down the far side, slipping dangerously on loose gravel, we barely stayed ahead. The station finally appeared through the trees, a small, sturdy building radiating safety. "Help!" Tom pounded desperately on the door. A startled ranger emerged, swiftly assessing our terrified expressions. "Poachers," Tom gasped, breathless. "They're coming." Without hesitation, the ranger ushered us inside, locking the door and grabbing his rifle. Facing armed authority, the poachers hesitated, then scattered as reinforcements arrived. The days following were a blur of police statements, medical care, arrests. The poachers were apprehended, justice served. Tom and I never completed our intended hike, yet we found strength we never knew we possessed. We still camped, wiser and more cautious, forever changed by the harsh truth that sometimes the greatest threats aren't found in nature, but in humanity itself. The rest of that night was an exhausting blur of police interviews and medical examinations. I described every chilling detail, the shallow graves, the frantic chase, the overwhelming fear of thinking my life might end out there in those dark woods. The investigators located the area I described and uncovered numerous bodies, each in varying stages of decay. It turned out, they said, to be the handiwork of a serial killer who had been terrorizing the region for years. Despite the discovery, the murderer was never captured. He vanished into the immense wilderness, leaving behind only grim evidence and traumatized survivors. I don't hike alone anymore. I simply can't bring myself to after that ordeal. The forest, once my sanctuary of tranquility and reflection, now, every snap of a twig, every rustle in the foliage sends my heart racing. Yet I haven't completely abandoned nature. These days, I stick to crowded trails, always surrounded by others. I've even become an advocate for hiker safety, sharing my harrowing experience as a cautionary tale. The truth is, danger in the wilderness isn't just about terrain or wild animals. Sometimes, the most dangerous predators out there walk on two legs. I often reflect on that day, realizing just how close I came to being another forgotten victim, another body buried in those shallow graves. It's sobering, but it reminds me of my resilience. I survived, I outsmarted a killer, and lived to share my story. Although it left emotional and physical scars, the experience taught me something profound. Life is precious, and every moment is a gift. Now, I never take anything for granted. Every sunrise, every breath, every step is a reminder that I made it out of those woods alive, unlike many others. I keep walking, keep exploring, always alert, because you never truly know what's lurking around the next bend. The first time I noticed the girl with the frightened eyes, I sensed something deeply unsettling. But never could I have imagined that working the late-night shift at a secluded truck stop would draw me into the dark world of human trafficking. Standing behind the counter, observing the routine flow of truckers and nighttime travelers, I was oblivious that I was about to uncover a sinister network that would forever alter my life. I'm Ben, and I'd been working nights at Roadside Junction truck stop for around 6 months. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and offered me quiet hours to work on my novel, or so I thought. The night that changed everything began routinely. I clocked in at 11 p.m., exchanging nods with Greg, the daytime cashier. Initially, things were typical, a steady flow of drivers, grabbing coffee, snacks, and stretching their legs. Around 2 a.m., I first saw her, a girl probably no older than 16, entering with an older man. The way she walked, the manner in which she kept her gaze lowered, immediately triggered alarm bells. The man hurried her towards the bathrooms at the back. "Wait here," he ordered, approaching the counter and grumbling for a pack of cigarettes without making eye contact. As I turned to retrieve them, I glanced into the security mirror. The girl stood frozen where he'd left her, eyes darting nervously like a trapped animal desperate for escape. Casually, I asked as I handed him his cigarettes, "Everything all right with your daughter?" His head snapped up, eyes narrowing sharply. "Mind your business," he snapped, snatching the cigarettes and roughly pulling her out of the store. My gut twisted. I knew something was terribly wrong. In the weeks that followed, I saw more girls like her, young, fearful, always accompanied by older men who treated them like possessions. Patterns emerged. The same trucks appeared at odd hours, the drivers exchanging quiet conversations and secretive glances. Fear gripped me. What if I was mistaken? And even if I was right, how could a simple night clerk confront an organized criminal enterprise? Everything escalated on a quiet Tuesday night, around 3 among the regular trucks I'd been watching pulled up. The driver entered alone, but left with 2 young girls, visibly drugged and stumbling. Panic surged through me. My shaking fingers dialed 911. 911. "What's your emergency?" I think there's human trafficking happening at roadside junction truck stop on Route 17, I stammered, my voice shaking. "Can you elaborate, sir?" the dispatcher pressed. I detailed everything, the suspicious men, the frightened girls, the consistent patterns I'd observed. As I spoke, I watched the security screens anxiously. "Units are on the way," the dispatcher assured. "Is there anything else you can share?" Then I spotted movement. A van pulling up, men quickly ushering more girls inside. "They're moving girls right now." "There's a van," I urged. The door chimed. One of the men I'd observed entered, locking eyes with me. He'd overheard. "I have to go," I whispered quickly, hanging up. The man approached suspiciously. "Who were you talking to?" he demanded. "Just my girlfriend," I lied nervously. "She worries if I don't check in." His expression darkened. "Step out from behind there," he growled, reaching toward his waistband, revealing a handgun. Instinctively, I reacted. I hurled a pot of scalding coffee at him, and he recoiled in pain. Seizing the opportunity, I sprinted outside, where chaos unfolded. Police cars had converged, officers shouting commands. I raised my hands urgently. I called. I shouted as officers approached cautiously, directing me behind the cruiser. The following moments seemed endless. Men were arrested, girls rescued, some dazed, others crying, gently escorted by officers. Afterward, a detective took my statement. "You did well," he said sincerely. "We've been trying to break this case for months. Your tip made the difference." I asked about the girls' futures, and his expression softened. "They'll receive care, counseling, medical help. It's going to be difficult, but they have a chance now, thanks to you." Later, the full scale of the operation emerged. This wasn't isolated truck stops, and multiple states were involved. Many girls were rescued, some missing for years. I testified in court. Even the truck stop's owner faced charges for turning a blind eye, Though offered a reward, I redirected it toward organizations aiding survivors. I left Roadside Junction, too scarred to remain. Yet I didn't abandon writing. I found my voice, sharing my experiences to expose the darkness hiding in plain sight. Sometimes I wonder about that first girl with the terrified eyes. I never learned what became of her, but I choose to believe she's out there, safe and maybe even happy. It's this thought that helps me sleep, reminding me that evil thrives in silence and shadow, but it only takes one voice to expose it. I'm no hero. I'm just a guy who noticed something wrong and decided to act. If my story does anything, I hope it inspires vigilance, courage, and empathy, because speaking up can save lives. The eerie remains of Graymore Asylum loomed ahead, its shattered windows staring blankly, lifelessly. I'd ventured here for thrills, aiming for a chilling photo to boost my urban exploration blog. Instead, I became ensnared in a real-life nightmare, pursued through rotting hallways by those who should have departed long ago. Sometimes the dead remain restless and madness lingers. I'm Kara, and abandoned places have always captivated me. There's an eerie beauty to buildings reclaimed by nature. My exploration blog is popular, so when I learned about Graymore, I knew it would become my crown jewel. Closed decades earlier amidst scandals of mistreatment and unethical research, Graymore was rumored haunted, its corridors echoing with phantom screams. Skeptical about ghosts, I believed more in the power of storytelling. Arriving just before dusk, camera gear in tow, I slipped through a rusted fence. Approaching the decaying entrance, I shivered not from the cool air, but something else. The broken door creaked ominously, flashlight beam slicing the darkness. I stepped inside, encountering peeling walls and scattered debris. Dust filled the air, a pungent scent of rot. Camera clicking, I pressed on, every shadow hinting at stories of past suffering. I prepared a shot in an old patient's room. It was then that I first noticed the faint shuffling sound drifting in from the hallway. I froze in place, straining my ears. Perhaps it was just the building settling, I thought, or maybe some stray animal had wandered inside. But then I clearly heard something else, a voice, faint yet distinct, calling out, "Hello? Can anyone hear me? Please, I need help." My pulse quickened. Had another urban explorer gotten hurt, or was this some kind of twisted trap? Ignoring my instincts to leave immediately, I cautiously approached the voice. "Hello?" I replied uncertainly. "Where are you?" The response came swiftly, clearer this time. "Over here. Please, hurry." Rounding the corner, my flashlight illuminated a figure curled against a wall. A young woman, clad in what appeared to be an old hospital gown, winced against the sudden brightness, shielding her face. "Oh, thank goodness," she murmured. "I thought nobody would find me." Something wasn't right, her attire, her voice. It all seemed strangely out of place, yet she appeared genuinely terrified. "Are you okay?" I cautiously asked, stepping closer. "How did you end up here?" Slowly rising, she avoided eye contact. "They brought me here," she whispered. "The doctors said they'd help me, that they'd cure me." A chill crept down my spine as her words sank in. This was impossible. The asylum had shut down decades ago, unless, instinctively, I raised my camera and snapped a photo. The flash lit the corridor for a brief moment, and in that instant, my blood froze. The woman was partially transparent. I could see the cracked plaster behind her. Stumbling backward in shock, I gasped, What are you?" Her head snapped upwards, revealing eyes of pure darkness. A chilling grin spread across her face, exposing jagged, razor-like teeth. "We're the ones left behind," she growled, in a voice far deeper and more sinister than before. "And now you'll join us." I didn't wait to think or reason. I turned and bolted down the corridor I'd entered from. Her laughter echoed behind me, soon joined by an unsettling chorus of whispers and screams that seemed to emanate from the very walls. Shadows flitted at the corners of my vision, phantom figures disappearing before I could clearly see them. I burst into a grand hall, dominated by a large staircase winding upward. Blocking my way to freedom stood a crowd of people dressed in faded patient gowns. Nurses and doctors, all with those same black void-like eyes and disturbing smiles. "Welcome back," spoke one, a tall, stern man in a doctor's coat. "We've been waiting." Frantically looking for an escape, I muttered, "This isn't happening. You're not real." The doctor laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "Oh, we're more real than you can comprehend. We've waited so very long for someone like you to free us." They moved toward me in jerky, unnatural motions. Panicking, I dashed for the staircase, climbing 2 steps at a time, hearing their heavy, deliberate footsteps pursuing me relentlessly. The upper floors were labyrinthine, and I ran aimlessly, lost in corridors that seemed identical. Each turn brought new horrors, patients with vacant stares, nurses stained with blood, doctors wielding corroded scalpels. Finally, I found myself in an old treatment room, ancient electroshock devices standing as silent witnesses to unspeakable cruelty. The only possible exit was a tiny window, barely wide enough to squeeze through. As I struggled with the rusted latch, the door crashed open behind me, unleashing a wave of ghostly figures reaching out with icy hands. With one final desperate push, the latch gave way. Without hesitation, I flung myself through the window, feeling shards of glass scrape my skin. I fell for what seemed like eternity before landing heavily in dense bush below, knocking the breath out of me. Ignoring the searing pain, I scrambled to my feet and sprinted to the fence, squeezing hurriedly through the gap I'd entered earlier. It was only when I was safely locked inside my car, speeding away from the cursed place, that I finally allowed myself to breathe. My hands shook uncontrollably as Ravenswood receded in my rearview mirror, its dark silhouette etched against the sky. Through one of its windows I glimpsed a solitary figure, its eyes gleaming ominously even from afar. I didn't stop driving until I reached familiar streets, surrounded by city lights and normal people. Only later at home did I remember my camera. With trembling fingers, I reviewed the images. Most were ordinary, eerie hallways and abandoned rooms. But then I reached the photograph of the spectral woman. There she stood, as tangible as any person, yet those inky black eyes stared directly at me, filled with malevolent glee. In a broken mirror behind her appeared countless faces, all with the same void-like eyes and nightmarish smiles. I deleted every image, destroyed my camera, and abandoned my blog forever. My exploration days ended that night. Nightmares of Ravenswood persist, black eyes, reaching shadows, endless rotting hallways. Sometimes late at night I think I hear whispers, sense movement in shadows just beyond my sight. I never shared what happened that night. Who'd believe such madness? But I know the truth. Some places hold on to their past horrors, where the tormented linger long after their physical forms decay. Ravenswood waits patiently, anticipating the next curious visitor seeking a thrill. So if ever you stumble upon an abandoned building, reconsider before stepping inside. Because once places like Ravenswood claim you, you may find escape impossible.